Welcome to this episode of Biz Takeouts, Biz Community's soundbite-sized news to go, made possible by HP, a technology company that operates in more than 170 countries around the world and is committed to exploring how technology and services can help people and companies. I'm your host, Angie White, and I'm very excited to introduce today's guest. Bradley Pulford is the VP and Managing Director for HP Africa, and today we'll be discussing HP's leadership goals, how the company is bridging the gap between youth and education, as well as the Africa First Time Buyer campaign. Welcome, Bradley.
Thanks, Angie. Great to be with you.
Great. So, Bradley, you are responsible for providing the country with leadership in South Africa. What is your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, I think it's so important to ensure that you have the right vision, for the community that you serve and that you work with. And the great thing just joining HP was that I think there's a fantastic alignment between the values, the culture that HP drives, and certainly the vision and the culture that certainly I stand for as well. So, there's really good alignment from that point of view. And really what we aim to do is, make people's lives better. And there's so much going on across the African continent at the moment that it's a critically important component to how we, empower communities across Africa. And so when you think about a couple of things, firstly, education, extremely important around how we empower those individuals and that part of Africa from an empowerment and an enablement point of view. Secondly, when you think about entrepreneurship and the importance of that for our future as Africa, that becomes very important. And then, of course, from a sustainability perspective, right, making sure that we can get into the hearts and minds of communities and really make a difference. So, that really resonates with me. That's certainly our culture internally from an HP point of view, and really looking forward to making a meaningful change in the company.
Wonderful, Bradley. And on that note, how is HP bridging the gap between youth and education that is quality?
Look, again, it's such an important focus for us because when you think about what's happening across the continent, there's roughly 224 million youth between the ages of 15 and 24, that really do need to be empowered in some shape, form, or size. And, this is where it becomes so important for the future of Africa as a continent. So, we're really leaning into a couple of things. The first thing I think, though, that is important is that as a vendor, you want to have a purpose and you want to have an outcome ultimately. And so we've committed to, from a digital equity point of view, to affect the lives of 150 million people by 2030, which I think is very important. That's us putting a stake in the ground and committing to it very, in a very kind of responsible way. Secondly is ensuring that we can start looking at some of the factors that are very important to our continent. Unemployment is one of those factors. And so being able to make a meaningful change through driving certain programs like HP Life, as an example, is very, very important for us. And we do that not only through driving, access to devices, which has become essential today, but also through driving the right curriculums in order to empower people and ready people for the fourth industrial revolution that's coming. And I think this allows Africa to be in a position where we can leapfrog, some of the other continents in a way that, can really make a meaningful difference for our future. So, these are some of the things that we're looking at. I would call out one other attribute that I think, or another program that I think is very important, which is really around HP Path, which is really about partnerships, and technology for humanity. And this is about partnering with alliances locally in those communities, ensuring that we can get into the hearts and minds of those people and, really ensure that we can get devices and curriculums, into those respective kind of communities where we can start making a change from a digital equity point of view in some of the underserved communities. So, a lot to do, but I think we are very focused around understanding where the challenges are and how we as a vendor can make a difference moving forward.
Yeah, like you said, a lot to do, but it sounds like you are doing a lot as well. So well done for taking the initiative in that area. Really sounds like you guys are making some really great strides.
Fantastic. And, it boils down to partnerships as well, Angie. So, I'd call on all the other leaders across the continent from different vendors and spectrums, to really get involved and make sure that this is part of their focus areas for their respective futures as well.
Definitely. And it's awesome that there are other companies partnering and taking this head on as well.
Absolutely.
So, Bradley, you also have great experience in the technology sector. How do you think the tech industry has impacted lives, especially the lives of business owners over the years?
Look, I mean, technology, specifically when we talk about digital transformation, this is a subject that's been around for the last 10 years, the last decade. And so, when I think about what the pandemic has done, it's really accelerated the adoption of technology and really made it very meaningful. I think there's a great appreciation for how productive you can be based on technology and the advancements, of technology. More importantly, if I were to call out a couple of areas that I've seen a dramatic change, if I think about women and youth and the access that they've been provided from a technology platform perspective, and from an empowerment point of view, I think it's made a significant difference, particularly when you look at what has happened with education in general. Having access to learning for many people that haven't had access to that, previously, but also the way that learning is now conducted, I think there's been a massive transformation. So, those two areas have been extremely important. Also, from a small to medium business owner perspective, technology has really driven a competitive advantage. It's allowed them to really have a seat at the table and transform their respective businesses, not only through having access through, internet connectivity, but also through ensuring that, they're really up to date with what is happening from a global standpoint. And more importantly, giving them the opportunity to take advantage of some of the cloud-based services that technology really drives, to give them that advantage that they require to be productive, but also successful in the various verticals and markets that they serve. So technology is really playing a massive role across many different verticals, and I think will continue to do so, in the future. So very excited about what the future holds for all of us.
Definitely. And talking about the future, tell us a bit about the Africa First Time Buyer campaign. What was the reasoning behind it and how did it come to be?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's really close to our hearts. When you think about what I spoke around the values and the culture that HP stands for. When we look at Africa as a continent, I touched on the fact that there are 224 million youth between the ages of 15 and 24. This is an age group that is going to really be the future of Africa, right? And so the First Time Buyer campaign was a meaningful campaign that really that was really, pivoted around the fact that we wanted to get, technology into the hands of those individuals that haven't had access before. I think that's one very important point. When we look at the trends that we see today, the device per household is now shifting to a device per individual, so that's very important. And then when you think about, what it means to have access to digital, whether it's social, whether it's learning, whether it's productivity, employment, giving yourself an opportunity around entrepreneurship, these things become very important. And so, First Time Buyer is really about making sure that we can create the visibility around the device now becoming essential to everybody as they look to build on their development and their future. So that's at the heart of what the First Time Buyer campaign really stands for. It's very important because when we think about the behavior of that category, that age group category that I spoke about, they tend to lean into mobile devices, which is not always an all-inclusive or broad-based platform that they can really use to build on their careers and their development. So it's about educating them around their have choice points. It's making sure that they understand how to go about, engaging devices, but also, procuring or purchasing devices, which is very important. And it's also around educating that youth, that there are possibilities out there that, technology can bring that can really foster a very bright future for all of them as well. So those are some of the key elements that we really, see as being very important for us as a continent.
Perfect. Thanks, Bradley. And you've mentioned a bit about the target audience before, but just tell us a bit more about them. Who are they?
Yeah, I mean, these are really the Gen Zs and, the upper echelon of the millennial type age groups, right? They're the individuals that are pivoting on education today. They squarely, I think, being impacted by digital transformation. their behavior and their knowledge, what they know, is really centered around digital and access to information. It's the now generation. And so this is really, I guess the age group, but also, the population that we focused around. Why is it important? It's important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we want to ramp up education and make sure that there's digital equity specifically in that area. Secondly, we want to ensure that there's an entrepreneurship opportunity for that population where they can feel empowered to really chase after their ambitions and their dreams to make a meaningful difference across Africa, right? We know the unemployment rate is very high, and so providing access to this kind of technology is going to be very important. One key point I would make here is that it isn't just about the device, right? And I spoke about this earlier. It is about accessing the curriculum and the content ultimately to ensure that they ready themselves for what lies ahead. And so, where I think HP has been very passionate and has really made huge strides is around ensuring that that content, both around learnership, working with the respective, ministries of education, but also from an entrepreneurial point of view, making sure that the respective content that is required is practical and is in place and is formalized. So this becomes, a formalized kind of diploma or, piece of education that somebody walks away with it that can take into their future. So that's really the population that we focused around.
Great. And while we're on that topic, the digital divide now seems to be a buzzword that's thrown around quite often by tech firms to make profits. How prominent is this in reality?
I think it's very prominent. 73%, of the African countries are using some shape, form, or size of technology today. And so we're seeing a big shift, to ensuring that there's an accelerated approach to how we use technology from African continent point of view. Again, it speaks to how we, give people access. It speaks to how we ramp up education. It speaks to how we can empower people around employment opportunities. It speaks to how we can really make accelerated progress across the continent and bring value out of the continent and beyond. So it's incredibly, incredibly important. And as we see transformation accelerate through remote working, I think what we're learning across many parts of the continent is that we can now be extremely productive by being remote and create value, right? Which is very, very important, because as we know, the continent itself is very dispersed, it's very fragmented, and it's a hugely complex continent. So technology is that medium that's been used that can pull all of that together and really create unified opportunities, going forward. So extremely, extremely important.
And while we're discussing getting the right technology to the right people and getting the right devices into the right hands, tell me how I would identify the perfect laptop for my kid. What should parents look out for in getting an educational PC for their children?
Yeah, it's a very relevant kind of discussion, because I think this is where we've seen a lot of change and transformation. Is parents, as I mentioned, are now starting to sit around the dinner table and they're talking about getting a device into the hands of their children, because their children are now learning different methods and they're also using different platforms, right, to access information. So it's become, such a choice point for all parents. There are a couple of things that I would, I guess, pivot around. The first thing is that you want to future-proof your device that you want to purchase, for your youngsters. That's important, because you don't want a device that is going to, have a very short-lived time frame and then become frustrated with what you have. So I would make sure that the processor generation that you're procuring today is one, that has some longevity, and I would, call out making sure that the speed also meets the requirements that you're looking for. So that's the first thing. Just make sure that you do some research around the processor that you're investing in. The second thing is you want some form of robust device, right? Because typically kids are quite hard wearing on the devices that they use. They throw the devices around, they're in classrooms, they're in rucksacks and all those good things. So, make sure that you've got a device that is going to, suit the needs of your child. The other thing I'd call out is, capacity is something that is immensely important today. So the hard drive, essentially, and a terabyte is what we see as being the norm or the standard, just based on the amount of information that children are consuming on a daily basis, whether it's through educational streams, social streams, etc. So the drive becomes very important. The camera, make sure you've got a decent high definition camera. This has become important because we're all working, socializing, connecting remotely today, and you want to ensure that when you're using platforms like Zoom or Teams, etc., that you've got some decent kind of camera on that device. I would also call out, that you should ensure that there's some kind of services wrapped around your device. I think that's very important. You want to make sure that you've got a warranty that's not going to frustrate you. We sometimes get trapped into a very short-lived type warranty. So just make sure that the services aspect, the warranty aspect does meet the needs, that your child needs and that you need ultimately as well. I think that's important. And then, of course, with us all being remote and certainly being on a very volatile type continent, and I refer to more the power, consumption, the stability from that point of view, you want to make sure that you've got some decent battery life ultimately that's going to meet the needs, that you may have, so that you can actually work and be productive. And the last thing I'd call out, Angie, which I think is important, is security has become important, right? Because what we're seeing is a huge amount of cyber attacks coming to hardware enforced type devices, whether it's through print platforms or even PCs or notebooks, right? So a lot of the devices today have some form of hardware enforced security, to prevent some of those cyber attacks. I would advocate that you may want to just do some investigating there to protect your own personal landscape as well. I think that's very important. So those would be a few things that I would call out.
Wonderful, thank you. Definitely some really, really great points there. I think security is of the utmost importance, especially when it comes to children and devices. So thank you so much for that, Bradley. And thank you so much again for joining me. It's been lovely chatting to you.
Likewise.
Thanks. And that's a wrap on today's show, with thanks to HP for making it possible. It's Biz Takeouts. Take it where you like it, when you like it. Until next time.